What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Well, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tack Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Mumbai Kutapi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles and Fort Lauderdale?
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault. He was a retard. I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I'm your host, Charlie Robinson. If you are watching us on iconic Rockfin, Odyssey, probably not YouTube, or you're listening wherever podcasts are served, thank you very much. I know you have a million options out there, and I certainly do appreciate you stopping by to check out the important things that we're trying to get across to people. We could not do this show without the amazing support of our sponsors. My Patriot Supply has been great to us. They've even set up their own website for us. It's called preparewithmacroaggressions.com. You can just go there and check out what offers they have available. They've got great deals on 4-week supplies of food and 3-month supplies of food. Take a look, see if there's something in there that works for you. If you're in the mood for prepping, and let's face it, after the last year we've had, you probably should be. You can take a look and pull the trigger on something from My Patriot Supply. They've been great to us. So go to preparewithmacroaggressions.com and get yourself ready. Listen, if you're not getting yourself ready through our website, that's totally okay. Just start getting yourself prepared. When you go to the store, get a couple extra cans of food, get some bags of rice, whatever. Start thinking long-term. This is a situation where you're going to want to be a month early rather than a day late. So think ahead. That's the advantage of listening to these crazy shows that I put out. And also, we can't do it without the support of our good friends over at Chemical Free Body. They've been making great products for a long, long time. They're a small business. They're located in Oregon. Tim James, the owner of the company, besides being a really great guy, he also understands what we're fighting. He understands what's happening with these maniacs. And at the risk of sounding like Alex Jones, he understands that the globalists are definitely a problem, and he is definitely selling vitamins. So you might want to take a look. You can go to chemicalfreebody.com/macro. I put together a video, just a 2-minute video that shows my results from Tim putting me on the Total Energy and Detox Bundle. And what that is, it's 2 canisters of Green 85, which is a powder that you add to 12 ounces of water, stir it up and drink it. And then you get 4 little containers with capsules: gut detox, toxin detox, probiotics, and ultra enzymes. And this is something that takes 5 minutes in your morning. Mix this stuff up, grab a handful of pills, swallow it, and get out about your day. You will feel so much better. I can say that with 100% honesty because I've done it. I've gone through the program. He put me on it for 90 days. My shorts didn't fit afterwards. And I'm typically not somebody that has a lot of weight to lose, but I was losing weight. My body was getting the nutrition it needed from the Green 85. It made a huge difference in the amount of food that I consume. So look, take a look, go over to chemicalfreebody.com, use the promo code MACRO when you're checking out to save yourself some money. Any orders over $99 will get you free shipping as well. You'll be supporting not just my show, you'll be supporting a small business and Tim and what he's up to. So it's worth it. If you happen to be in the market, if you're not, no harm, no foul. We're still going to run this show. You're still going to get a free podcast. It doesn't matter to me, but I encourage you to support our sponsors if you can. Now, well, about a year ago, I was contacted by my friend Rich Willett, who is a director over at Iconic. He is he's David Icke's guy. He directs him and works on the footage that he's put together. And he said, "I'm putting together a new documentary called 2020 Lockdown 2020 Prime for Panic. Would you like to be in it?" And I said, "Absolutely, Rich. Anything that you're doing, count me in." We recorded it. It was fantastic. And then when it came out, I got a chance to see all the other people that were in it. And that's where I saw our next guest, Mark Malone. Mark is he is the founder of America 21st Century. You can go to his website, America21century.com, and check it out. What's going on, Mark? How are you, man? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, I remember seeing you in the documentary. We talked about it a little in the email, and I was like, it's really cool to see now, a year and a half, near enough later, to see like who got it right in the beginning. Yeah, because you and I were just a few guys in that documentary, which is like early April 2020.
Yeah.
So this is when people was like, Alex Jones, like, "Oh, it's a bioweapon." And, you had like all this kind of, and then, there were guys like us, which were like, this looks economic to me. This looks like they're trying to wipe out all their independent competitors. And then, of course, vaccine, everything else. So that was kind of the cool thing about when you reached out. It's like, oh, yeah, this guy switched on. He knew what was going on in the beginning.
Yeah, well, we and it's not to say that we have it all figured out, but when you watch these people, when you see how they work, when you understand the way the United Nations is and the way the World Economic Forum works and how NATO is involved and all these groups, you know that whatever you're getting told by the media isn't going to be true. You know that there's an agenda behind it. It's about trying to figure it out. It's about pattern recognition. And you go, I've heard this before. Or when you hear Biden, during his run for president, talking about Build Back Better, and everyone's going, "Yeah, Build Back Better," and we're going, I know that term. I know where that comes from. That's not some organic term that this dope just picked up out of nowhere. He got that from the World Economic Forum. There's definitely people behind the scenes making this happen. So you probably feel the same way. I'd rather be wrong about all this stuff. I'd rather be just totally insane and have everyone go, "You thought that there was a big conspiracy and it turned out there wasn't." I'd love for that to be the case, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be that way. I'm curious. So let's just start with the baseline here, and let's talk about what you're doing with America 21st Century, because this is really important stuff. And it's fascinating to me because it gets right to the heart of what I think a lot of us are talking about. And that is the role of these global governance organizations in driving policies for not just America and not just the UK, but the world. And it's frustrating to me that a lot of people don't understand. They see the United Nations, they go, "Oh, it's the United Nations. Don't they show up and hand out rice when there's a tornado or a hurricane or something?" It's like, maybe, but they also rape everybody in war-torn countries when they're there as well, too. So would you like some rape with your rice? Because that's what the UN is serving up. So when I saw what you were doing, I was like, oh, this is, in fact, for people that are interested in hearing more of your stuff, you just did a great interview with Rich Willett, speaking of Rich, the director, for his show Glitch in the Code, which people should definitely go watch. I watched it and I was like, first I sent an email to Rich saying that was great. And then the next email I sent was to you saying, would you please come on the show and explain how this all works? So how'd you get started with this?
Well, I began, like many of us did, just, researching the New World Order, you could say. I began on this journey about 10 years ago. And, through the likes of David, and I was friends with Michael Tessarian for a while, and he's done a lot of good work on this. And but like many of us, partly I didn't take it seriously. There was a part of me, honestly, as I kind of came maybe to 2015 and 16, and we had the Brexit and Trump stuff, I was like, maybe it's more subtle. Maybe globalism's more like the EU and stuff like that, which it is. But I honestly kind of pushed to the back burner a little bit this deeply intricate global state plan until March of 2020 happened. And then I started to see all the pieces that I'd spent many years prior looking at actually happening. Suddenly they were calling for the end of cash. Suddenly they were regionalizing the world, and we'll get into why that's important. And then I was like, oh, shit, all of that was true. So I spent then 2020, and I just become a father. Like, my baby son was born the day they announced the national emergency here in America. For those that don't know, I live in Arizona. So, so I was like, wow, I just became a father, just not long moved to the country. And now, the New World Order is kicking off. And because I had, a fair bit of knowledge on this subject, and I'd also worked in academic settings, corporate settings. I've done linguistics. I've done data science. I basically did a data analysis in March of 2020. And I was like, oh, this is all nonsense. This is a fluke. And I proved it by the data model. So then I realized kind of what was going on. And I figured, well, if this is going to go to its completion, I'm going to have to use my skills, whatever ones I have, just as we all will. Some people are great farmers. Some people are great builders. Some people are great electricians. Mine is all in here. So I have to use that to try to put the brakes on some of this stuff. So throughout 2020, I dug into, what is this plan? Because, of course, we have, things like the Great Reset that come out. But the Great Reset is very vague. And this is an important thing that I've kind of tried to stress to people. While the Great Reset is real, it's an idea. It isn't an implemented political system. The implemented political system that underpins it is Agenda 21, which was launched in 1992 by United Nations, 179 nations, including US, UK, Europe, etc. So that underpins the Great Reset. That is the actual political structure. So if we're to actually put the brakes on this thing, we can't attack ideas anymore. Like, that time has passed because, 2/3 of the country in this case, and in many other countries, it's more like 3/4 to higher than that, are fully on board. So how do we actually attack the structure to separate ourselves from it? I don't believe we can stop the New World Order, but I believe that we can separate ourselves from the New World Order. So I take a very pragmatic approach to this. I go, look, even if we are successful with what we're endeavoring to do, which, obviously we'll talk about, that's not going to stop the entire plan, but it's going to cut them off from us, or cut us off from them, which is enough, because ultimately, you have to have the consent of people anyway. Like, I can't go into San Francisco and start saying, all right, guys, this climate change stuff is nonsense, because they're just going to throw Molotov cocktails at me anyway.
Yeah.
Whereas,
you can go in the Walgreens and steal as much stuff as you want and not get the police called.
Yeah.
You can and you can shit on the sidewalks. That's totally fine in San Francisco.
Not with this kind of pigmentation. You can't, I'm afraid. We won't be getting away with any of that.
That is,
so what I do is I focus on what I call Middle America, which I think we all intuitively know is, the heartland of the country, the mountain region, so everything really from Idaho across to North Dakota down to Oklahoma. And then focus there because those people I know are on our side instinctively, even if they don't know all of the details. So I put all my focus there. So throughout 2020 and 2021, I essentially launched America 21, which is the antithesis of Agenda 21. So rather than it being their agenda for the 21st century, it is our agenda for the 21st century, and a new America for the 21st century. And began really with this thesis, this philosophy paper I wrote on the website, which is about 14,000 words. And that kind of details, that's kind of like a precursor to what I think all the work we need to do is. I'm kind of pointing out what sovereignty is, why sovereignty is important, how we ground our ethics, our epistemology, which is knowledge, and our metaphysics, which is kind of the nature of reality. So I'm trying to kind of reground people on our side, because the conspiracy information is good, as important, But that isn't a justification in of itself, because what we end up having is like, it's just A versus B, and B thinks they're right and we think we're right. So how can we actually ground it in proper morality? And how can we ground it in proper truth? And I'm trying to work on that in a similar vein to, what Thomas Paine did, who was also an Englishman who came over from England and obviously one of the founding fathers. He wrote Common Sense, which kind of was a precursor to the American Revolution. And he was just basically detailing out, why independence from the empire was important. What I've kind of tried to do is something similar, except in this case with global governance as opposed to, the British Empire. So why we need to separate ourselves from global governance. And then from there, I got invited to the GOP convention in Montana, where I did a speech and a presentation about Agenda 21 to politicians, and I don't know who was who. I have no idea. I could have been speaking to the governor for all I know, but I didn't. But there were, directors and policymakers and, congressmen and stuff there. So that was kind of a good launch.
Did they think that you were insane, or did they, I mean, You're not obviously, but did they think you were insane?
Actually, it was mostly positive. There were a few, there were like two smirking, thinking, wow, this is a bunch of bullshit. But no, generally, actually, it was very positive. There were guys at the end, and, I don't know whose roles were what. They wore lanyards, but I was, speaking. But there were guys at the end who were asking me like genuine questions, like how did they manage to get all of this through without us seeing, and how do we stop it? And they were genuinely interested by the end. And that's because the presentation, I was using all of their own documentation. I'm using their own maps, I'm using their own quotes. And as someone who has done a lot of work in linguistic territory and in analytics, I just pull apart what they say and show you what those words really mean. So for example, like in the global governance context, if you type in New World Order into Google, for example, it'll say, oh, it's a conspiracy for world government. That's partly true. And in the sense that it isn't world government, it's world governance. And that linguistic change from governance to government is critical, because they're not actually building global government. They're building global governance. So when you can pull apart the linguistics, you can actually show that what they're saying is true. But what we've thought, how we've interpreted it, is very different. So it won't be like a legislative government as such. It's going to be technocracy. So you'll just have suddenly scientists, media, various government bodies acting as one unit. And that's how they can get away with it under the guise of governance, because governance doesn't have to be elected, nor does it have to be strictly legislative. It can be, advisory, finances, etc. So just using my history to kind of pull that apart and show people, look, they are kind of correct. It isn't a global government. However, they're very open about the fact that they want global governance. And they stated on World Economic Forum, United Nations, all their documentation. So I think it went well, but there's a lot of work to do, because we're going to have to do that, in several more states, and then keep going round until we kind of get the tentacles pulled out.
Yeah. Well, speaking of tentacles and linguistics and verb, the use of words in my first book, The Octopus of Global Control, the format of that book is a little funky, because I took quotes from over 500 different people that had some role or some opinion on the most important events in our history. And I used them in the book to sort of punctuate that. And I described that as verbal judo, where I would take the weight of these politicians, I would take the weight of their words and use that momentum against them. I would basically show what they have said as my argument against them. So that was, I felt like that sort of illustrated it a little better, when you could take their own words or the words of people in their administration and just sort of flip that. I'm curious about, you talked about Agenda 21 launching in 1992, and that's the agenda for the 21st century. And then we have Agenda 2030. We've been hearing about that as well. I don't have any sort of evidence to back this up, but I have just this feeling that it seems like there was a memo that went out to all the maniacs that are in charge of the world, saying Agenda 2030, let's move that up a couple years. It seems like they moved the goalposts up. It seems like everything got a bit rushed, a bit hurried, a bit like if 2030 was the goal, it seems like they've decided make it 2025 the goal. And to be crystal clear, I have zero evidence to back this up. It just seems like all of a sudden that, as David talks about the totalitarian tiptoe of going, instead of going A to Z, you go A to B and B to C. It seems like to me they went A to L, and then they just made bigger jumps than normal. Is there any sort of documentation showing that they've moved up any of these timelines, or am I just imagining things?
No, it's a good question, because many of us, before we really dive into this, have been puzzled by this idea of Agenda 21 becoming 2030. And then when they brought the Great Reset in, it makes it even more confusing, because you're like, well, which strategy is the correct strategy? So I'll break it down as concisely as I can. Agenda 2030 is the milestone year of Agenda 21. So they actually haven't discarded Agenda 21. Agenda 21's end goal is 2050. So by 2030, that's the major milestone year that they want most of Agenda 21 achieved by. Okay. So the Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030 is 17 of them, like no poverty, clean water. And we can talk about how subversive and communist that would become. But, the idea basically is that they want most of that achieved by 2030, but the Agenda 21 timeline was to 2050, which still stands.
Okay.
There was certainly element though of subsiding to 2030, because the internet, 10 years ago was becoming aware of Agenda 21. So 2030 was like a little of a judo thing for them, where they're like, well, okay, we have to kind of shift the attention. And I can only speculate, but I think it's because the Agenda 21 document, which you can actually find on my philosophy thesis on the website, hyperlink, is much more honest than Agenda 2030, the document is. So written in 92, before the internet, of course, they could get away with it a little more. So they're very open about saying that it's the centralization of land, water, and air, which is the entire planet. But of course, when you come to Agenda 2030, which is 2015, an entire shift of culture and optics, they have to be way more subtle with the language. So it's things like, gender equality, which just means that they're going to force mothers to work and force your children to be in indoctrination camps. And then they say, no poverty. And what that means is they're just going to crush everybody economically. So, they have to be more subtle. You can still understand what it is if you know the lingo. But Agenda 21 was much more honest. And they're very open about the fact that it is an ecological form of government, which has to supersede national government. In this case, the Constitution would have to be secondary to the needs of the environment, which is very convenient, because that just means, no Constitution anymore, I guess, because it's just not important enough for the environment. So it's a milestone year. And as it relates to the Great Reset, we talked about a little, that's more of the idea. It isn't technically a political implementation. It's more like a think tank. The best way to think of the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset itself is it's a think tank idea that has been seeded out to kind of ideologically possess people. But the political framework is still Agenda 21. And we have the evidence for that in all of the counties across America and the world. But they're all the same thing. That's the point. So the Great Reset is Agenda 2030 and it is Agenda 21. They're just different layers of the timeline. But it is all the same plan.
Okay, so let's jump into Agenda 21 then. That is a United Nations initiative. United Nations, of course, founded by David Rockefeller. That should be the end of the discussion for most people. Automatic disqualification on anything that they want when you've got the guy who on page 405 of his autobiography said, people have labeled me and my family as internationalists, that we were trying to create. There you go. You've got it. You've got the book right there. They've tried to label me and my family as internationalists, that we are trying to create a one world government. If those are the charges, then I am proud of them and I stand guilty as charged. So when that guy who is talking about world government and has the financial capacity and maybe not to do it all himself, but certainly has the connections to the banking establishments and the governments, when that guy starts talking about a one world government, we should probably listen. And they start the United Nations, which is a perfect name for it, right? It's a cover story. It is United Nations, right? I guess they technically aren't lying. Like most things, it's kind of out in the open. We are United Nations. We're uniting them into a one world government, in case you didn't notice. And then we chose for our flag a flat Earth that's divided into 33 sections. So we can let David Weiss go geek out on that for a while.
Yeah.
But when they announced Agenda 21 in 1992, was that where they did it in Rio?
Mm-hmm.
That was
the Earth Summit, Rio.
They brought out a similar young Brazilian girl, kind of the first version of Greta Thunberg, to go out there and sort of sell this turd to the to the world population. Always, they're always thinking it's hard to be critical of a 12 or 13-year-old girl who comes out there and talks about uniting the world in peace and everything. It's kind of hard to shit on that, and they know that. So what was the as far back as you can go, where was the real foundings or the real beginning ideas of Agenda 21? It had to have been more than just David Rockefeller putting this together. Who sort of is involved in this?
That glitched a second there. Yeah, well, I mean, I would say that it goes back to Babylon.
Okay.
The Tower of Babel. But we don't have to go there today.
Okay,
we can say that for another time. Technocracy really is the idea, right? Is the means of governance. So often people think that it is like a communist or a fascist takeover, and it is. It's both at the same time, but it's neither at the same time. So what technocracy is the merging together of every system, communism and capitalism, which of course, actually, if you merge those together, the public and private, that is fascism. So it's by de facto, it is all systems merged together. Basically every system since the Enlightenment, liberalism, communism, fascism, which are really the only three governance systems since the Enlightenment. So you merge them together, and then you have technocracy, which is the science of social engineering. Rockefeller certainly, and his ilk, certainly the purveyors of it in many ways, but they're not really the thought behind it. So, they have the motivation, right? So, David Rockefeller, Zbigniew Brzezinski, many of these globalist types, they want the global governance, and they certainly injected a lot of their thought into it. But it fundamentally comes from the technocrats of the 20s and 30s, people like Thorstein Veblen, people from Columbia University, which, by the way, Aldous Huxley knew. Those guys, that's what gave him the influence to write Brave New World. If you want to know what technocracy is, it's Brave New World. Now, 1984 precedes Brave New World in what we will experience in the timeline. So what will happen is, the way that I view it is the 2020s is 1984, as they crack down, they break skulls. And in the 2030s, they will move into Brave New World forever, as long as they can. They need people to enjoy their servitude. It can't be forced down people's throats, otherwise they won't put up with it. Brave New World is the model of the technocrats, or at least Aldous got it from them, because they knew that the way to true slavery was for someone to enjoy their slavery. So technocracy, essentially, the science of social engineering, makes you a slave through ideology. Through the things that you consume, the information, the education system, the media, the science. I mean, really, no one has been forced to take this vaccine yet. Everyone has not just willingly done it. They forced other people to do it. That's the kind of power technocracy has that Hitler could never have dreamed of doing without lifting a finger. That is the power of technocracy. It's a mind virus, right? So through their ideological social engineering program, which goes through technocracy, the Frankfurt School, the Tavistock Institute, etc., through the United Nations. There's many arms of this, but fundamentally, it's a social engineering program. So that's kind of where it begins, and that's going to be the governance model. But over the course of this decade, as they have to break down the old system, Western civilization, which sort of this idea of sovereignty, individual, national sovereignty, as they break that down, it's going to seem more 1984. But that is just the gateway. Once they get past that and they've broken it down enough, it'll be full Brave New World where everyone will be doped up, enjoying their servitude and getting their booster shots every month. So it really begins in the 20s and 30s as this means of system we see unfolding today. The idea of actually having a global governance is, as I said, it really does go back to Babylon in many ways, but not as we see it unfold today.
Yeah, it's been a fantasy of every psychopathic dictator world, trying to conquer the world, but there's always limits. The Roman Empire stretched itself too thin, expanded, debased its currency, started too many wars, like America. Things like that, they always tend to come down. I wrote a book called The Controlled Demolition of the American Empire. Obviously,
right.
I feel that that eventually they present you with the bill, and America can't pay the bill at this point. But there's never been the opportunity to have world government because just the technology never allowed it. But now it seems that there is. I would suggest that if it was up to these people, they would probably prefer for us that there be fewer of us to control with this Brave New World sort of technology. So maybe they run a little depopulation agenda through the 2020s to clean out all of the low-hanging fruit, people that are obviously sort of willing to walk right into the mousetrap, and then start that push. So when you talk about the 2030s, the Brave New World, loving your servitude,
mm-hmm.
Paint that picture for us a little bit. How does that work? Is this, are we all in smart cities? Are we living in micro apartments? Are we eating crickets? Are we paying our carbon tax to the one world government? And obviously owning nothing and never being happier. That doesn't sound appealing to me, but we know that they intend to use pharmacology as a way to sort of make you feel happy. So is it going to be a literal drugging of society to make them sort of feel happy? Because I'm reading about this mRNA technology, and they're talking about people sometimes getting the shots and feeling like a euphoria, like that they've got this boost of like they feel great, and that there's a component of it that can be used for mind control. And I feel like, oh my God, this is too nuts. So is this a technocratic mind control? Is it technocratic chemical infusion where the mRNA just prints out the new, I don't know, dopamine and feeds it straight into your body, or serotonin to make you happy? I mean, how do you envision this working out in the 20 years from now?
Yeah, well, I think if we look at it at the meta level, right? So very high level. Yes, I think that through genetic alteration, which will for sure continue. I have a book by David Livingston called Transhumanism, which I really advise people read, which was written in 2015, and it details out the origin of that idea and where that's headed. So that book in particular kind of details this idea of transhumanism. And yes, I do believe that in the 2030s and beyond, people will kind of be hooked up to it'll be like a crack fix being hooked up. VR can be like that. Why wouldn't it be? VR could, normal life could never compete with VR, right? You can have any kind of life you want. And so this idea that people will be drugged might not be literally in the sense that it's intravenously drugged, but for sure they will be doped up. I always tend to lean more towards the mind being doped up in terms of ideology. And that's the philosopher in me, but it's also because I know how effective that is and how much it motivates you when it is a visual thing, because we're very visual creatures. You're very, very moved by visuals. And that's why pornography is such a big addiction for people. So I'm always kind of the mind that they will use your eyes to funnel you into being doped up in whatever means that is. So that kind of is the meta level. And ultimately, on a more specific level, when it goes to like the pods, the smart cities, well, that relates to everything that we're doing in America 21, which is essentially halting that entire agenda. So the smart city network, basically there's a hierarchy which loosely goes through the United Nations, through to the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Then you come down to the United Cities and local governments, and then you come into your local regions, councils of governments, and metropolitan planning organizations. These work in America. So the councils of governments, the metropolitan planning organizations, right now where you live, are breaking up your town and redesignating zones, forcing some people out of business. And this is even prior to COVID, but of course sped up massively now. and rebuilding that city. So by 2030, these major cities such as Denver, Phoenix is a big one, will be smart cities, which will essentially be controlled by sensors and technology. An algorithm will control that city. We already see it in China. People think it sounds impossible. It exists in China right now. And China is actually the only open technocracy in the world at the moment, but they're open about it. So if you want to know what technocracy is, in the 2020s, it's China right now. So the smart city is essentially a panopticon, what I would call a prison, an open air prison, where you're viewed from every angle. Unfortunately, as we look at the America map of 2050, which is the United Nations map, you won't be able to leave that region. So it will literally be an open air prison. You will not be able to leave your smart city, your smart region initiative. What do we think the green passports are? So the vaccine passports in the EU are called green vaccine passports. They'll drop the vaccine eventually, and they'll be just green passports. You'll require special access on that green passport just to get out of your smart city. That's the future by 2030 that they're going towards. And their excuse is biodiversity. Oh, we need to keep you away from the nature. We need to keep you away from the land. So you guys need to be prisoned in here, and we're just going to provide you, everything that you need. So that's kind of what it is. You won't be able to own property. There won't be houses. There certainly won't be like families. They don't want marriage. They don't want families. That's like Christian stuff. That's like, that's so like first century. No, we don't need families. We just need, birth control and meaningless relationships, and hopefully don't populate anymore, So it's a very bleak future. It's a very isolated future. It's a future where you don't really have any sovereignty. You don't have, certainly don't have the right to own guns. You don't have the right to own property, but you don't even really have the right to have your own life, to chart out your own path. It's kind of like, it would be like living in Gaza just without the bombs, right? So we look at Gaza right now. Gaza is, you're kind of stuck. If you want to get shipments, you kind of have to go through this, tyrannical government next door. So it's kind of like that, except you won't be bombed. You'll want that servitude. And if we look around today and we look at how a lot of people are acting, I mean, if you think of where they would be in 9 years of continuing the behavior they're continuing now, it's very easy to see at this point.
Yeah, we have exposed a whole lot of authoritarians. A lot of so-called, liberal people, and I'm not on the red team or the blue team, but a lot of liberals that are, that are closeted authoritarians that have come out during this pandemic. We've seen this. But one thing that I've noticed that my background is in real estate, and I've seen something lately that is alarming to me, and it matches up really well with what you just said. And that is that the Biden administration has gone around changing zoning laws, preventing single-family residential from being built, and changing that, rezoning that to high-density multifamily. That the idea, and then so the idea that single-family homes are maybe going to be harder and harder to find because the zoning laws are being changed. I couple that with BlackRock out there with almost an unlimited budget going up and buying portfolios of homes sight unseen, 20% above list price. I know what that does. I lived in Las Vegas during the last boom and bust. I saw what happens, and Goldman Sachs did the same thing. The only difference is they got to a point a couple years later, after they had renters in all these homes, that they then sold the homes and took a profit. My feeling is that this time around, they're not selling the homes, that they're keeping them, they're taking them out of the market, so that gradually, maybe it'll accelerate as we get closer to 2030, but gradually they're removing even the option for single family residential home ownership. And that is alarming to me. But what you said fits nicely with that, because you would need to have, in the smart cities, high density buildings. You just go, just look at the old Soviet, so the old Soviet Union and Soviet style buildings, big, gray, boring, cookie cutter buildings that all look the same and really depressing. That's where we're going. Are you saying that they're going to, for Agenda 21, they're going to hit it at the local level too, to make these massive changes? Is that sort of where, are they focusing a little bit on the local level and make the changes to zoning and laws like that?
Yeah, it's actually all at the local level. And that's actually why I launched America 21, because when I dove really deep into this and I realized that the New World Order, as we call it, the global governance structure, which is politically just Agenda 21, I'm trying to distill this down to the finest point, right? Because there's so many strands. There's like, oh, the Rockefellers did this, oh, the Federal Reserve, oh, the World Bank, oh, the Iraq War. And there's just too much. Like, so what I've done is like distilled it down to the finest point. And that finest point is what is actually going to change your environment into this tyranny. And that is really Agenda 21. And then the next step you get to is, okay, so how is it going to be implemented? And this is when we get to the real meat and potatoes of what this is and how we can stop it. So as I kind of explained, we have this global to local structure, which if you want to see in more detail, you can find on my website, maps everything, especially on the thesis, the Declaration of Non-Dependence. You can find it all there. You can also see my presentation on there as well. So global to local, UN, all the way down to these two organizations that work in every state across the country, councils of governments, metropolitan planning organizations. Councils of governments essentially force your city council and your county to adopt this regulation. And if they don't get the federal funds, which the councils of governments get from the Federal Highway Administration and the Department of Transportation, and in some cases, the security agencies. So they force the county and city to go along with changing regulation to support climate change, which is just global governance. Metropolitan planning organizations force the city, the same people, the city council, the county, to adopt, zoning laws, which restrict, independent business, restrict traffic. But most importantly, which they don't know yet, is actually about restricting movement. They say it's about business. They say it's about metropolitanizing, environments. But when you look at the end game, what it really is they're building cities that are circular. So everyone is trapped in those cities. They don't want people leaving the regions. It's Hunger Games style.
Right.
So the map of America 2050 will show you on my website that each region is broken up and you are to remain in that region. And they want to keep the rest of the land. So if you want to kind of set out, let's go back 30 years. How are we going to, by 2050, have a global governance structure with each nation in the world broken up into regions? This is how they have used it. So they've used the climate change narrative to, say we need to take the land, which is Biden's 30 by 30 plan, right? 30% of the land conserved by 2030. It's just Agenda 21. So he is basically saying, we're going to take a third of America's land, which is public land, back. And that's one example. The BlackRock property is one example. But ultimately, it works in your town. So the MPOs, the COGs, they take this climate change legislation from the United Nations, from United Cities and local governments and agencies like that, and they force you to implement it. So Agenda 21, the New World Order, global governance, isn't being implemented by Biden, really. It's actually being implemented by your counselor right now, where you live. So this is also something that people really need to understand. And why often people say to me, like, why am I getting into the politics? There's no solution in politics. I'm like, yes, of course there isn't at the federal level. But at the local level, actually, there's a lot of remedy in politics for the reason I'm saying. I went to Montana. There's only one town in Montana that has this. So most of Montana, just like Kansas, just like Oklahoma, just like North Dakota, etc., are pretty free of all of this stuff right now. So we actually still have a good 9-year window, let's say 8-year window, to actually prevent some of this from ever getting into those places, and maybe even repealing it in some places. Very possible. I spoke to many of them, and we already saw 3 weeks after I was at the event, the governor of Montana came out and said he's ending his climate membership. So that's just 3 weeks of me being in their face and telling them about this.
Right.
There's actually a lot we can do. But you just need to understand that it's in your town. And of course, you can't change Rockefeller. Of course, you can't change Biden. But this technocracy is not actually going to be birthed in Washington. It is going to be birthed in your town. So if you can reverse it in your town, you've freed up your town. And if every town can do that, we have successfully prevented and stopped this New World Order. As I said at the beginning, that's not going to stop it in its entirety, but it cuts it off from us. And that's the best we can do. And then, of course, we can hopefully give this platform to people in the United Kingdom and Australia and Canada, and they can do their version of that. But, here, all we can do is work with what we have. So there is a lot that can be done. But yes, it is almost all at the local level. people have been tricked into thinking that, Rockefeller has the power. Mm-hmm. He doesn't. Actually, it's all being implemented in your city council.
Wow. Can you take the camera and show us your chart on the wall?
Yeah.
You have got the original Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia conspiracy
That's
chart
right.
on the wall with the
This
strings.
Is the conspiracy wall.
There it is, baby. There it is. That's beautiful. That's really
every Agenda 21 top to bottom. So these are the kind of organizations we were talking about, right? So we have all the way down, and then this is America 2050. So these are the regions that they want people stuck in, and they plan to carve out the rest of that land for themselves for biodiversity.
Right.
These are the points. So these are the ones that we're attacking right now. Politically, we began in Montana, and these are all the states that are pretty free of this stuff. So we have a lot of land that we can basically take back. And even some of these states with spots like Idaho, and they're very little. So we have a good shot of basically going, right, we cut them out, and we take the land back politically.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something that I think I've talked about before. I'm going to probably do another episode where I do a much deeper dive at something that I think some people might not associate might not have this connection, but it is the concept of climate change and how that is a fake concept being actually a genius concept if you think about it, because in their Club of Rome documents in 1971 they talk about how in searching for a common enemy to unite us, we decided that the idea of climate change and global warming would fit the bill. Or global warming, I think, is what they said. They later called it, what the numbers weren't always going up, so then they changed to climate change, which is more of a kind of covers you going up or down. So, and they lay it out right there. This is the push for world government or governance. I don't remember exactly how they phrased it. That they were going to use the idea of global warming in order to push this. So this is a carbon tax scam, in addition to being, like you said, a control scam. You can use, it's such a catch-all term like climate change. You can use that to guilt people into doing just about anything, giving up these public lands, staying out of the ocean, staying off of lakes, staying away from streams, staying away from nature in general. I've told people that they're going to hear about climate change forever. The concept's never going away. It's too important to these people. So we're sitting here middle of 2021. We've got roughly 9 years or so till we get to this magical goalpost of 2030. In the period between now and then, where do you expect this climate change narrative to go? How is it going to be? How is it going to be used to control us? And where will we find ourselves just a few years from now?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me, I think they will start really bringing the narrative back in around 2023. I think they need to really. And it's always there. It's not like it's gone away. It's still going to be there this year. It's going to be there next year. But I'm talking in a more serious way because I think they need to run this COVID operation through a while longer. Why not? It's working so well.
Yeah.
I do think, though, that they will also bring in some other kind of virus. It could be a real one this time. Who knows? Maybe we'll actually get a virus next time. But at the moment they're running, they do what they always do. They rebrand an existing thing. So with climate change, they rebrand an existing thing, which is the climate changes. So this time they've rebranded cold and flu season. They just rebrand existing things. And that's also the black magician in them. I don't want to get too biblical about it, but pharmakeia is a biblical term, and it says that the world will be changed through pharmacy sorcery. That's in the Bible. So this idea of pharmakeia is essentially that they're sorcerers and they use certain kind of medicine and technology to be that. So what they do in this kind of black magician context is they use what is there. They use existing materials. They're not actually making anything up as such. The climate is actually changing. It's just nothing to do with carbon dioxide. So they're not fully lying, right? They're rebranding an existing material. cold and flu season happens and perhaps more people got sick because of XYZ last year. It is real, but they've rebranded the reason for why that is. So I imagine that they're going to continue pushing this subversively for the next year and a half. In 2023, I think it'll start really, really peaking. They may throw another virus out there. I would say around I want to say around March 2025, when the World Bank COVID-19 protocol ends. World Bank had the protocol ending at March 2025. I have a feeling that they'll probably bring something else in around that time. But the climate is going to be an underlying thing, and it's going to really, really just start going up and up as we get closer and closer to that point. So I think that ultimately, though, they've achieved so much in the last year and a half that 2025 may even be our deadline at this point. 2030 is when they expect to reach what they want to reach. But the way that I look at our deadline is, when do we get out? When do we get on a lifeboat? When do we jump off? And I look at our deadline as 2025. I have a feeling, no evidence to back this up really, just a feeling that they're going to do another major psyop in 2025. So I kind of feel like we have a few years to get some of this work done. So it's like, hey, okay, maybe we've only freed 3 states. Great. Let's just all pile into those states and then leave everyone else. You know what I mean? As long as we can get something done, something concrete, something real by that time, I think we'll be okay. But we have to do it. I actually have a good book here, which I recommend by scientist, Dr. Ed Berry, called Climate Miracle. And this is a really good book. He details out how climate change is essentially nonsense in this book. And he's a scientist from Montana. It's a really, really worthwhile read.
I'm going to need to get that. It's frustrating to me that these people take something that we all live on this planet. We have to live here. We have to deal with this. They take something as sacred as that and bastardize it and turn it around and make us feel guilty for living on this planet. Now, could we do things better? Absolutely. We have the Exxon Valdez crashing in Alaska back in the 80s. We have done unspeakable. We have the Deepwater Horizon pipeline, offshore drill blowing up and flooding us with oil. I mean, we treat this planet like we've got another one to go to. And it's horrible, the things we do. There's clearly ways that we can treat this planet better. But that's not what they're talking. They've hijacked all of these topics, all of these attributes, these things, these pollution and all the real things, the things that we really get worked up about. They've hijacked those attributes and used them and called them all climate change. So it's like, if there's some, you're upset because the Ganges is filled with trash, you should be. You're upset because of massive pollution. If you go to, you go spend a day in Beijing, they say the statistics, it's like smoking 19 cigarettes is the equivalent of one day just breathing in that polluted air. These are the things that make people furious, and rightly so. And these jerks at the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and all that have hijacked all of those things that we feel deeply about, that are legitimate issues. And they've said that is climate change, and that is that is putting too much carbon in the atmosphere, and we have to change all of your behavior for this. And it's your fault. It goes back to the Club of Rome, uniting in a common enemy. And so we're in this weird spot where it's like, on the one hand, there's legitimate reasons to be upset about what we've done to this planet. And yet that isn't, they've stolen that and used that as cover for them to say that, well, we're going to have to we're going to have to change behavior. We're going to go into a full-blown behavior modification program, which reconditions all of you so that you aren't doing any of these things anymore. And they're going to take the credit for changing the world, when they're the people that are in charge of doing all of this stuff. They're the ones that have made the policies. They're the ones that have raped the earth and cut corners on regulations through the industries that they control. It's so devious and disgusting. But yet CNN comes out, or in the Project Veritas hidden videos that you see, and you've got that producer going, yeah, well, we're sort of kind of done with Trump and Biden. We're going to pivot more towards climate change. And you go, that's it, man. That's the agenda. Could they pull this off without the help of the media?
No. At this point, perhaps, just because people have been so conditioned. But I would say certainly not in the run up to where we are. Social media, though, really, I would blame even more so than the actual media. You know, if we think there's many reasons for this, but the primary one being that the COVID-19 narrative was mostly perpetuated inside of social media, like this echo chamber of amplification, right? So yes, you saw things on the news, of course, but it's the scrolling and seeing, oh my God, another person in hospital, right? What's the device you're actually watching the news on? It's usually Facebook. It's usually social media feeds that you're scrolling. Also, there's this EEG activity, right? So we know that when you're watching things, your brain's in an alpha state and everything goes straight to the subconscious mind. So you're kind of in this hypnotic trance, so where you're susceptible to everything, right? So you're scrolling through, you're just taking it all in, all the satanic brainwashing. You know, so then it starts coming to the surface and you start like spouting these ideas. So yeah, there's no way they could have achieved it without the media or social media. I mean, that's why the H1N1 never took off, because there was no Facebook phones.
Oh,
you know,
yeah, good point.
Right. But now it's like, oh my God, panic, right? And so I think the phones have been the bigger problem. But, you know, the mainstream media, of course, historically has done the most of the work, right? Whether it is, you know, from the Iraq war or whatever issue it is. I would say it's just media in general. It's just the fact that people don't know how to critically think anymore. And that's because we're not taught how to, you know, we're not taught by our parents. We're not taught by our schools. We don't read the right material to learn how to think. So I think it's just a problem of culture, unfortunately, you know, and the climate change narrative, it's so deeply ingrained in people. People get very vicious when you attack the climate change narrative. You know, I noticed it with COVID too. I lost, you know, Rich and I spoke on the last podcast about losing friends in this COVID-19 era. And I've certainly seen a lot of that, which I'd never seen really in any other issue. But I've also seen it as much with the climate change stuff, or perhaps even more with the climate change stuff. It is what I would call it's a worshipping the creation rather than the creator. So your religion has now become material. And of course, you know, there are lots of problems in the planet. You know, I wrote in the thesis on the website, reject global governance, don't reject environmentalism. And in that section in the thesis, I explained kind of what you were just saying, that we should be responsible for our land. We should be responsible for the ocean. We should be, you know, there should be heavy penalties, whatever you define penalties as, for throwing a cigarette into a dry woodland, right? We should be respectful. I appreciate all that, but that has nothing to do with global governance. And that doesn't mean we should obviously concede to our total human autonomy being taken from us. Maybe if we could get to that point as a culture, we'd be okay. Like, okay, let's look after the environment, but let's cut off the parasites first. But unfortunately, I think this religion has been so deeply embedded that the people proselytizing it on the street, the average university student and teacher, are just too invested in it being global now. I'm not sure that us just going, okay, let's take care of America and cut out the global governance. I don't think they'd go for it. It's because it's too wrapped in global governance, and for them, it's all about saving the world. You know, so I'm not sure there's a solution to reach those people. My strategy now is generally just to aim at the people that are anti-New World Order and try to carve out a new piece of America. Do what Thomas Paine did before me and try to replicate and be like, well, we just need to do this process again because we keep finding ourselves here. So this time we're going to have to carve out another piece of the fucking country and separate from tyrants again.
Yeah, and it's weird that the people that are like the hardcore environmentalists and you know, a lot of them, I think, mean well. They want to take care of the planet. That's great. I want to take care of the planet as well. But they have internalized this in a way. Like what I saw with COVID was both horrifying and fascinating at the same time, which was these people that typically have no power and nothing going on in their lives have embraced this idea that they're going to be a part of saving the world. They're going to prevent some people from getting COVID because they're going to wear their masks. They're going to wear 2 masks. They're going to wear 3 masks and a butt plug just to be safe, so that they don't get it or spread it. And then they're going to tell you what you have to do, even though they're 150 pounds overweight. So it's crazy to me. So I've watched this go on with COVID, and I'm thinking, you guys just need a hobby besides trying to tell everyone what to do. And then I think, what's that going to be like when these people have moved on? They feel like they've done something. They felt like they feel like they've saved the world in some weird fantasy in their head. What are they going to do when they take on climate change? Because that's a tough one to unpack. It's like, you can't change somebody's mind. You can't explain to them that it's all a front, being used for a cover story for this one world government creation that's happening behind the scenes. You can't do that in a Facebook post or a tweet. You don't have the latitude to explain this whole thing out. It takes much longer than that. So I fear moving forward that the cult of COVID is very easily migrated into the cult of climate change, and that anybody, much like anybody that denies or has not even denies COVID, but just has questions about it, will be treated as a heretic in this cult of climate change when they have legitimate questions and just, raise their hand and say, teacher, I want to, I have a question. This doesn't make sense. They'll be crucified. Do you see that happening sort of the same way? These people losing their minds and becoming the self-directed Gestapo of climate?
Yeah, it's funny because they're like the most pathetic Gestapo, because they're not even scary.
Antifa,
right? So yeah, I know they
throwing Molotov cocktails because they can't throw it. Yeah, it's sad.
It's hilarious. I was in Flagstaff, and there was just these two little white dudes holding Black Lives Matter signs like this. This is a small town in the north of Arizona. I'm just walking with a .45 caliber strapped to my belt, and I'm just what? Really? It's not in this kind of environment that every dude is heavily armed. Arizona is there aren't even any gun laws in Arizona. You could buy a tank. So it's Arizona's gun laws are you don't need a license for any gun. It's real libertarian out here. But
and
what's interesting
about mass shootings every single day, like we see in Chicago.
It's strange, that one, isn't it?
Funny,
it's almost like it's the morality of the people that matters and not the laws. It's so anyway, the reality is though, is that I don't think they have any obviously real force. What they're doing is all social shame. And the social shame is actually more powerful, right? So you often, you like a guy like me, I'm not particularly easily threatened by force. But even I'm susceptible to social shame when all my friends start going, oh, let's not invite Mark out anymore. He's not vaccinated.
Right.
And then it's I don't give a shit. All I need is God and I'm good, and my family, obviously. But had I been even me 4 years ago, I would have been susceptible to that for sure. I absolutely would. Before I had kind of, grown a little more in my strength and stuff, I absolutely would have if they'd said, Mark's not vaccinated and we're going to go out to the pub and we can't invite him. I probably would have caved, as many people are. So the social shame is really, really powerful. And I think that will continue through the climate change stuff as well, where they'll just be you're using energy to buy something that isn't necessary. Because this is where the language is already, they've started infiltrating the psyche with the language already. Essential, right? So it's, what's essential? What's essential purchases? What's essential workers? Well, as we move into this climate agenda more in the forefront, that's going to become even more important because are you using that energy, be it, gas, electricity, whatever, for essential reasons? Because if you're not using it for essential reasons, you will be penalized for using it at all. Yeah. And that's part of all tied into the Agenda 21 and Smart City framework. Whereas everything will be smartly controlled. So they'll know if you're using more than you need to and you'll get punished for it. So kind of goes back to the EU passport being called a green vaccine passport. Mm-hmm. So when they drop the vaccine and it's just a green passport, it won't be no longer the biomechanics that they've changed, because they've already done that. They already now have patented your DNA and they own your DNA now. So they don't need to worry about that anymore. How much energy are you using? Because ultimately the Matrix was kind of right in the allegorical sense, which is that you are a battery. You are an energy source to them. Mm-hmm. So the control of the energy isn't about the external energy. It's about the control of you. You're the energy. You're the resource that they want to control as the battery. So by using a green passport, what's your energy usage? What are you contributing? How much have you talked against the state? How many times have you done X, Y, Z? And then just through sheer social shame and through kind of pushing society to value a certain type of outcome now, you can control people without force.
Wow. I think this topic is one that people are going to really need to dig into. The concept of pro-sovereignty, anti-globalism is very important. And once again, much like the prepping, you don't want to be late on this one. You want to get out in front of this and make moves on the local level to try and stem the tide of this. Where can people go to connect with you, to get involved with what you're doing and help out any way that they can? What's the best way for them?
The website, America21century.com. I recommend people, the thesis is very long. If people really want to know some deeper stuff, you can read that. But I recommend at least watching the presentation, which I did to the GOP convention. It's only 25 minutes long, which you can find on the website as well. So that will sum up everything we've talked about in a very concise way. Other than that, you can find me on Facebook and YouTube under my name, Mark Malone, for however long. I will be on there.
Yeah, I'm with you. You can find me there for as long as I'm at macroaggression, but I'm day to day, just like everybody else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, there's so much to dig into. We'll be connecting, I'm sure, at a future date. That's Mark Malone, everybody. Go and support him and follow him in the social media places for as long as you can. And if you like this show, take the additional step now of just sharing it with your friends and family or people that you think might be receptive to it. We got to start getting people thinking about this stuff. The sooner, the better. Thanks, everybody. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.
You spend the first hour of your vacation at the luggage carousel thinking there's nowhere to go but up. But there is a place to go but up, because when you open your suitcase, you find it filled with dolls. Dolls like the ones in that movie that scared you so much you wet your girlfriend's bed. Ah, Marissa, the one that got away. You return the bag to the airport with relief. It lasts until you get back to your room, where a fallen doll waits to greet you.
Don't let a suitcase full of dolls ruin your vacation. Go on a real vacation. Go RVing.